talk to you about Genesis today. The term Genesis means the origin or mode of formation of something. So the term Genesis, in and of itself, has a meaning. And it means the origin of something. And so when we study the book of Genesis, and we think of the origin, we automatically think of the origin of
life,
the universe, life, mankind. How many people know how many chapters are in the book of Genesis? I want to see all my Bible scholars right now. How many are there? How many? You're a little high, but you're in the ballpark. And you want to do it without cheating? The book of Genesis has 50 chapters in it. There are 66 books of the Bible. There are 50 chapters in the book of Genesis. In those 50 chapters, only 2 of them talk about the creation of the earth. And technically only 1 of them talk about the creation of the universe. The other one talks about the creation of a garden. So of all of those chapters, of all of the start of the origins, it's not just the origins of the universe or just the origins of mankind. It starts the origins of a nation. And there are all kinds of people today that would debate scientifically about the accuracy of the book of Genesis. And I would just like to say to you that we can debate those things, and I can give you several points of scientific fact that would support young earth or creation in 7 days. But the important aspect isn't the scientific debate. When this book was written, it wasn't written for a scientist. It was written for human beings who want to have a relationship with God. And so God infers a lot of things when He's telling us about religion. He wants you to trust Him. But the important aspect isn't how or when. It's really important who. And then that who builds to why. Why did God create us? Why did God create us? What does it mean if God is the creator and we were to spawn from a cosmic accident? Could laws exist without a lawmaker? How many of you believe that if we didn't have a Congress to make laws, that we would have laws? A few of you? Okay. And how would we have laws if someone didn't make them?
Well, you asked if we would have laws if Congress didn't exist. Yeah. You didn't ask if nobody was here to make them.
So how many of you believe that we could have laws if someone didn't create them?
Oh, wait, never mind.
Right? How could we have laws if someone didn't create them? Someone has to create laws. In order for there to be laws, there has to be a lawmaker. There has to be a lawmaker in order for there to be laws. Our universe is governed by laws. Laws exist in the universe. The law of gravity exists. The laws of thermodynamics. There are all kinds of laws that exist. And laws do not spontaneously generate from nothingness. How many of you would believe that it would be possible for a book to be written without an author? Anyone? You think you just put the alphabet in a big pile and explode it, and then it wrote the Bible? Or it wrote the dictionary? Or it wrote Mary Had a Little Lamb? Twinkle, twinkle, little star? You can't have a book without an author. Do you know that each of you has a unique book that is written about you somewhere? And I don't think you can go to the Library of Congress and check it out. You are all written, your whole aspect of who you are, through your DNA. There is a code that exists that's specific for both Cecil and CJ, whether I get their name right or wrong. For Josh, and for Michael, and for Garfield, and for Karen, and Pamela. We all have this unique code that's written. And it defines that. It determines what color your eyes are. It determines what color your hair is. It determines how tall you're going to be. It determines if you struggle with sugar or not. It determines whether you're going to be prone to have heart disease or cancer. There's a unique code that's written for every human being that's specific to that person. So that if you commit a crime and we can get your DNA there, it's tough to beat. I mean, I know that there are sometimes they say that there's a 99.9% chance that it's this person. There's some variance that it could be someone else. But there are some amazingly unique things about creation. Your fingerprint is just yours. No one else has one like it. No one has ever had one that's just like your fingerprint. Do you know that there are no two snowflakes that are exactly the same? When I was a kid, there was a school in the neighborhood. My parents moved there, so I go to school, went there for kindergarten. After kindergarten, they closed the school. So my parents moved there for me to go to school one year. But they had this wooden playscape, and it had like a bridge, and it was, I don't know, 10 feet in the air, 8 feet in the air, something. And I used to love going up on that, and there was just all woods in front of it, and you could just see snow for miles that was untouched. Every one of those snowflakes, completely unique and cannot be replicated or copied. Every grain of sand, completely unique. We went to the beach. There's a lot of sand at that beach. Every one of those granules of sand, completely unique. How does this all happen from chaos? How does this all happen from accident? I worked in a salvage yard, and you cannot put all of those cars together and set off a bomb and then have a Chevy dealership. You can't add energy to something and improve it. It destroys it. But yet, we were supposed to be this cosmic accident, all of the mass that ever existed into an infinitely small point. Energy was added to it, it accelerated, it exploded, and it spun out and created the universe. You can't have code without a code writer. You can't have a book without an author. I'd like to read to you from the scriptures, Genesis chapter 1, the beginning. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That sounds like a statement that probably a lot of you have read several times, and you probably haven't put a lot of thought of it. But there's this amazing scientific truth that takes place in that sentence that you're not even thinking about. See, it requires time, space, and matter. We live in linear time. That's a big word, linear time, right? If you've ever watched Star Trek before, they had to try to explain linear time. They did it with a baseball. As the baseball's moving throughout time, it's not in the same place. We don't exist in every aspect of the time of our lives. We are at the stage of life we are at right now, in this moment. Yesterday is the past, tomorrow is the future. Today is a gift, that's why they call it the present. Bad joke. But in the beginning starts the marking of time. And in order for a linear existence to take place, something has to originate. There has to be a starting point for time to start being kept. And a lot of us think that we live in 3 dimensions, right? What dimensions do we live in? What are the dimensions of a 3-dimensional object? Who went to school? Length, width, height, correct? We're 3 dimensions. But I would challenge you that we actually live in a 4th dimension, and that is time. Time is a dimension in which we exist in. That is an important factor to figure out. If you were talking to me 20 years ago, you'd be talking to a much slimmer length, width, and height. Well, maybe not height, but length and width, probably, maybe, sure. Time is an important aspect of creation. And God starts it out with, in the beginning, there was a point of origin. It didn't just exist. And so there are a lot of scientists that would debate about, did time ever actually come? Did everything always existed? And God's saying that in the beginning, He created space and matter. Now, imagine, if you will, this is going to take some imagination because you can't comprehend this. Imagine having stuff and nowhere to put it. Is anyone here a hoarder? Yeah, we got some people. Yeah. Oh, don't put on your wife. What's the matter with you? How comfortable is the couch at your house, Christina? Does it get
I don't know. He's going to find out.
Yeah, tell me how that works out for him if he doesn't get enough sleep. Do it before he has to go back to work, because you don't want to be tired at work, but now's a good time for him to be tired. All right, so if you have a bunch of stuff, let's say you have a bunch of yarn. Can I use you, Christina? Let's say you have a bunch of yarn and you're out of space. It's a horrible thing. Like, you have to create more space.
Yeah, just start throwing out his stuff.
Oh, ouch. Yeah, you deserve it after that comment, buddy. I'm not even help you. But imagine if you have matter, but no place to put it. How could that even exist? You can't have matter without space. God created space, the heavens. And when we use the word heaven, it doesn't mean where God's dwelling. If you read what Paul said he knew a brother was taken up to the third heaven. The first heaven is the sky, the space, the firmament that we exist in right now. And then there's outer space, and then there was heaven. God created that first, because if you created matter before space, it couldn't exist because there's no place to put it. That's a real important aspect. Scientific truth, that you had to have time, space, and then matter. This is written from people that wrote this obviously God knows this, but Moses is the author of this book. He wrote it 1,500 years before Christ was born. No concept of science. And yet it's scientifically accurate from the point that you have to have time, space, and matter. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. So we have this earth, and He created matter, but He hadn't given it shape. It was just a lump. Just like the clay we sang about in the song this morning. You are that clay in God's hands. Let Him be the potter. Let Him form and mold. So the earth was just this lump, this shapeless lump, and it was empty. And darkness was over the surface of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. We sang, breathe in me today, right? This term, breath, is representative of the Holy Spirit. God's breath was over the deep. And in the first 3 verses, as we'll see, you have the Trinity, the Father, the Holy Spirit, and then the Son. And there's this interesting trinity of time, space, and matter. The Father, the Spirit, and the Son, that I could teach on for an hour, but we're not going to get into today. But for those of you deep thinkers, think about the Trinity of creation and the Trinity aspect of God. So the breath of God, the Spirit of God, hovered over the waters. And God said, let there be light. And there was light. God saw that the light was good, and He separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness He called night. In a lot of creation stories from various other origins, if you go back and look at the Samaritans or the Babylonians and they talk about their creation ideas, there's this dichotomy that exists between light and darkness, good and evil in creation. A lot of them have the Creator split into two beings, one good, one evil, eternal good. Darkness exists. It existed before light was created. Darkness is the absence of light. Now, God did not have to say, let there be darkness. He had to say, let there be light. And that separates the two. And God saw that the light was good. And then He realized that there was a functionality for both light and darkness. And He called one day and He called the other one night to separate the light from the darkness. Now later, of course, as we get into, if we look at John chapter 1, we learn that Jesus speaks the universe into existence, that He created the world through Him, without Him nothing was created. And then it goes into a light versus darkness aspect, especially later on in the chapter. Like as we move through this, there is a light versus darkness. But in this aspect of it here, there is not a separation. He's not calling darkness evil. It just existed, and the light separated the darkness. There's a time for light and a time for darkness. And then as you read through the whole Bible, the Bible says that we should be awake during the light and sleep during the darkness, and that people who live during the darkness, that make that their time, have a darkness in their heart. But the idea of this light and darkness, God is not calling anything bad or evil, just that it was. And realize that this light source is not the sun. God does not create the sun until day 4. When God says, "Let there be light," who is that light? Jesus. Jesus is the light of the world. In the book of Revelation, as everything's wrapping up, he says there is no sun because Jesus is the light. Jesus is the light. He saw the light and it was good. Okay. And there was an evening and there was a morning the first day. The word in Hebrew is Yom. And so maybe you've heard of Yom Kippur, Yom Teruah. It's the day of. Okay? And so a lot of scholars will say the word Yom doesn't always mean a 24-hour period. There's the age gap theory. And there are several Christian theories of creation. One of them is that there was a society that existed before Adam. And that is not biblical. You can't find any biblical evidence to support that. Okay? You can't find anything that says that there was possibly a pre-Adam universe. Then there are ones that says the age gap theory. Have you heard that before? Where every day is 1,000 years and that every one of these things existed. And so to try to make us match up with current scientific understanding, we have to say that the Earth and the universe is billions and billions of years old. Because if it's not that old, scientists are afraid that they would have to live up to God's standards and acknowledge their sin. And so people will say, okay, I'm not against science. I'm a firm believer in science. I believe that there's lots of good science out there. There is also some really bad science that exists out there. And I'll get into some of that more at a later point. But this idea of Yom being longer than a day, and there are some instances in Hebrew where Yom is an extended period of time. But there's a problem if you look at a word and you just want to translate it into English and say, okay, this gives me a greater understanding. So this could mean more than one day. If you let the Bible translate itself, you'll be in a lot better shape. Because Jesus several times confirms that the earth was created in the beginning, that Cain and Abel was close to the beginning of creation, that God created everything. If you know about the story about the Sabbath, remember they were questioning about how he was eating food at the Sabbath? And Jesus said that the world was created in 6 days, and on the 7th day God rested, and on that day the Sabbath was created for man, not man for the Sabbath. Jesus uses Greek terms that fulfill the fact that this is a 7-day literal creation. And so who do you believe? Do you believe Jesus? Or do you believe what other people want you to believe in order to take your focus off from, could this be God's creation? Could this be God's earth? But again, the important aspect for this isn't that, do you believe science? Do you believe the Bible? It's who created building towards why? Who created building towards why? And God said, let there be a vault between the waters to separate water from water. So God made the vault to separate the waters under the vault from the water above it. And so it was. God called the vault sky, and there was an evening, and there was a morning, the second day. And God said, let the water under the sky be gathered to one place, and let dry ground appear. And it was so. God called the dry ground land, and the gathered waters he called seas. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, let the land produce vegetation, seed-bearing plants, and trees on the land that bear fruit with seed in it, according to their various kinds. Now this is the kind of statement that God makes to prove to you that certain forms of evolution that we say exist is not true. Okay? And so we have to define the term evolution. A lot of people ask me, do you believe in evolution? And I have to say, yes and no. There are forms of evolution that can be proven. Variation among species can be proven. And we can prove that with your dogs. Your dog does not look like my dog because there are variations within species. You can put two big dogs together and have a little dog somehow. How in the world does that happen? Because somewhere in that code of those dogs, there were codes for little dogs in there. And those genes somehow became predominant when the egg was fertilized. And so I believe our dog, Harley, you said both of the parents were pretty good sized medium dogs. She's a little bitty thing. How does that happen? Because there are variations within species because of genetic code that can change. But what you can do, you can take a wolf, you can take any kind of dog, you can take a coyote, a fox, they're all canines, you can all create something from them. What you can't do is put another species in there and create something completely new. A dog and a cat cannot breed together and make something new. And if we can force it to work genetically, somehow it will not be able to reproduce, it would not be able to make its own kind, it will not be able to start its own species, it would be infertile. Things replicate after their own kind. Imagine certain aspects of evolution were true and farmers planted corn and then they got peas instead. How frustrating would that be when you're planning on something like that? When you breed animals and you breed two horses, you expect to get a horse. Imagine if you had an elephant. There are certain parts of evolution that were taught is true in school that's never been observed. They would have to have chemical evolution, and even when you would put elements together, you really can't evolve past iron into the higher metals. If you could, I would make gold unlimitedly. It's impossible. They've been trying to do that since the Dark Ages. Planetary evolution, microevolution, the changing from one species to another species, never been observed. No one's ever seen, how come something new life form has just come wandering out of the wilderness? Well, it takes billions of years. We've been around, according to them, billions of years. Something new should be on the horizon. The fact that you don't need your wisdom teeth does not mean that you're evolving from something else. And if we've been around for billions of years, why do you still have your wisdom teeth? Shouldn't they have evolved out of the way by now? There are some scientific things that we are taught in school that are not proven, that are considered theories, but they teach them as facts. And that can be dangerous. So these fruits, things with seeds in them, they produce after various kinds, and it was so. The land produced vegetation plants bearing seeds according to their kinds, and the trees bearing fruits with seeds according to their kinds, and God saw that it was good. And there was an evening, and there was a morning, the third day. Now, I need to point something out to you. We live in a symbiotic relationship with the world. That's a big word again. Why does it keep using big words there? What's symbiotic relationship? The plants need us, and we need the plants. The plants breathe out what we breathe in, and we breathe out what they breathe in. We need each other. How could the plants exist before there were human beings? Or how could human beings exist before the plants, or animals before the plants? On the first day, God created them. Of course, there's no death before sin. An important aspect to understand. Because we have plants without a sun. We have plants without animals and human beings to breathe out. If this was an age of time, if this was 1,000 years, 1,000,000 years, 1,000,000,000 years, 1,000,000,000,000 years. By the way, does anyone know how fast the age of the universe is growing? In the 1700s, We were taught that the universe was around 50,000 years old, and then it grew from 50,000 years old to 200,000 years old, and 200,000 years old to 1,000,000 years old, from 1,000,000 years old to 10 million years old to 10 million years old. At the rate at which we're growing, we should be trillions of years old by now. Because as they continue to look further and further and back through time and see the stars, they think, okay, well, we always pulled it from one source and we grown out. Do you know that the Bible says that God stretches out the heaven? Not that he stretched out. He continues to stretch out the heavens. The heavens are growing further away. There's a thing called the red shift, if you're in science. And the planets and the stars are growing apart from each other. And that actively happens. So people think, well, it takes light billions of years to travel that far, and we're just seeing this light, so we have to be billions of years away from it in order to see that light. Or could God have created in a way that space out enough to look like it's that old? And is space that old? Can space be that old? If in the beginning we create time, space, and matter. So we have this effect, we have these plants, there's no people, there's no sun, how do they exist? There's no death without sin. And God said, let there be light in the vault of the sky and separate the day from the night. And let them serve as signs to mark sacred times and days and years. And let them be lights in the vault of the sky to give light unto the earth. And it was so. God made two greater lights, the greater light to govern the day and the lesser light to govern the night. He also made the stars. God set them in the vault of the sky to give light to the earth, to govern the day and the night, and to separate light from darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was an evening, and there was a morning, the fourth day. Now science will tell you today that there are trillions and trillions of stars, so many stars, that for every person on earth, there are 11 trillion stars. And God sent all of those out there so that you would know what day it was, and how to travel the sea at night, and when summer is coming, and when winter is coming. God created all of that for you. And God said, let the waters teem with living creatures. Let the birds fly above the earth across the vault of the sky. So God created the great creatures of the sea and everything within which the water teems and that moves about in it, according to their kinds. And everything, winged bird, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. God blessed them and said, be fruitful and increase in number, and fill the water in the seas, and let the birds increase on the earth. And there was an evening, and there was a morning, the fifth day. So God creates living creatures, and this symbiotic relation takes place. How we breathe, what we breathe in, what we breathe out, what's needed to survive for plants and for animals. And God makes them after their own kind. Now the interesting thing is, evolution kind of follows the same pattern. They say that life began in the sea, and then we come out and we have from the sea, we have avians or lizards that grow into birds. They kind of mask the same kind of steps of creation because there was a logic to the way that God done this scientifically. Then God said, let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and over all the wild animals. I skipped part of that, I'm sorry. Where God made the wild animals according to their kinds, and the livestock according to their kinds, and all the creatures that move along the ground according to their kinds, and God saw that it was good. Then God said, let us make mankind in our image and our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds of the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground. So God created us, and He created us to be like Himself. And we are like the Trinity. God said, let us make God in our image. A plural and a singular. Does it make sense? The term for God in this is Elohim, based on the roots El, God, and the plural, meaning two, more than two. So even in the ancient Hebrew text, in their writing, God is being put out there as Trinitarian. He's three parts. You can find it in the first three verses. You can find it in the description of his name. And a lot of people say, can you prove that the Bible has the Trinity in it anywhere? Yes, we can in several places, but nothing better than the first chapter of Genesis, if you understand the language. So he makes us to be like him, and we are to rule over the earth just as he does. He created it, and he rules over it, and he made us to steward in his place over it. So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it, rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, and over every living creature that moves on the ground. Then God said, I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food, and to all the beasts of the earth, and to all the birds in the sky, and all the creatures that move along the ground, everything that has breath of life in it. I give every green plant for food, and it was so. Before the fall, any seed-bearing plant was food. And God did not give us animals to eat. God did not create creation for death to occur. We don't give permission to eat food to animals as food until Noah's time. God did not create things to die. He didn't create the fish to attack each other. He didn't create the animals to attack each other. Everything that ate was a vegetarian back then. How unflavorful for them. They never got to taste bacon in that first run. That's the biggest crime in the Bible, isn't it? That Jesus lived and suffered and died, and because he was Jewish, he never got to eat bacon. And we're joking, obviously, but there's this aspect to the original creation that it was not designed for death, but for eternity. And a lot of people ask me, what's heaven going to be like? It's going to be a lot like this. A reason that God created us was to have someone to love. To have an intimate relationship with someone. He created this beautiful environment, this self-sustaining environment, with all these amazing things, just so that we could thrive enough that he could love us and be in a relationship with us. Has anyone ever loved you that much before? Where they created an entire universe. By the way, do you know where the word universe comes from? In its original form, it's a single spoken sentence. Anytime a scientist talks about the universe, they're talking about a single spoken sentence. How did it get that term? Because God created it in a single spoken sentence. God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. And there was an evening, and there was a morning, the sixth day. So for chapter 2, next time, and I won't be here next week, but we'll pick it up next time. In chapter 2, we're not talking about a further story of the creation. It's already been created. And by the way, this first chapter has this amazing rhyme and mathematical equation to it that can only be written by God. A human being would not be able to mark out how it has 7 words and a 7-line structure. It has an insight and an authority to it that a human being would have. Do you know almost every other creation story, every other religion has scientific inaccuracies in it. And a lot of people try to say the Bible has scientific inaccuracies, but none that can ever be proven. As a matter of fact, one of the most amazing scientific accuracies that existed 1,500 years before Christ was that life was found in the blood. They killed George Washington, our first president, because they thought his blood was bad. And there was a book right next to him that said life is found in the blood. There's a lot of good scientific facts in the Bible, but people have turned our current society into an argument between science and faith. And I'm telling you that God created science, and good science exists in the Bible, and that science and faith can live together hand in hand if people are honest about seeking who really wrote and created. The reason that our things come up differently is because there are all kinds of people throughout history that did not want the Bible to be correct. Because if the story of creation is correct, then they're accountable to God for Him saying what's right and wrong. And they don't want to go to hell. They love their sexual sin. They love their drugs and their alcohol. They love to be in charge of their life. They love to make decisions, and they do not want to be held accountable that there was a creator that created them with a purpose to love them back. Why did God create you? He created you because He wanted to love you. That's amazing. There is no more romantic story. You can read Romeo and Juliet. You can watch the first 10 or 15 minutes of the movie Up. You guys never seen the movie Up before? It's a great love story at the beginning of it. It's cute. But no matter how amazing a love story is, there will never be a more amazing story than someone creating something from nothing so that they could have an intimate relationship with them. That created time, space, and matter. That created a beautiful environment, a paradise garden, with no worries, with no thorns, with no fears, with no hard work, no chance to die, and just one chance to prove that they trusted Him and loved Him. And they think. Let's bow our hearts for a word of prayer.